I'm Fran, I'm an addict. And before I begin, there's something I want to do for somebody. Every once in a while, real special people cross your path, and they're not people who are in your life every day, but you just know they're special, and you watch what they do in NA, and you watch the service, and you watch how much they give of themselves. So I want to take a minute because Jay Bird had 10 years, and I want to give him his coin tonight.
Keep coming back. Hi, Grandma.
Hi. You know, I'm not saying this to sound cocky or anything, but I've traveled a lot for NA, and I've spoken at a lot of conventions. And people ask me, do you still get nervous? And I went, it's like a progression. In the beginning, when it first used to happen, I'd be nervous for weeks ahead, and then it became days ahead. And I really got it down pat. I would be really okay until the minute the reading started. And then that stomach would go into a knot, and I had this urge to get up and say, okay, enough of this shit, we've heard it all, can we just do this? Because I knew once I got started I'd be okay, but it was that waiting. But I haven't been real nervous in a long time until this one. And Brenda asked me today, did I have any idea why, and I kind of think I do. I walk into a place on the mainland, any state, where I don't know a living soul. I get up and I say, this is who I am, and I pack my bags and I leave. And that's a real safe thing. And tonight, I'm with my own support group. You know, I'm with my friends, people in recovery with me, and it's nervous. It's just nerve-wracking, and all week I kept saying, why is this bothering me so much? But first I want to thank the committee for asking me, and especially since I was here once before 5 years ago. So this is kind of an honor to be asked back a second time. And I know there's a whole lot of you that were here 5 years ago, and I'm going to give you my apologies because guess what? My story didn't change. So you're kind of stuck with some of the same things because some of what I think I want to talk about is important to who I am in my recovery. And my story evolves out through the steps. I'm not going to do a story except to tell you in a quick 3 minutes. I was an only child, and I got very sick in 1948. It was the years before the polio vaccine, and I got it. And I ended up in a hospital paralyzed for a year and on a lot of drugs. And I guess it was the beginning of the end. And I was 9 years old. And I remember a whole lot of pain when I came out because there was an epidemic and nobody was allowed to play with me and nobody was allowed to come near me because people were afraid of getting it. So I think a whole lot of feeling very different started back then. And I also went through 11 years of Catholic school, which I firmly believe is 3/4 of my problem. I am definitely a recovering Catholic. And that took longer to recover from. And I think I went through a stage going through Catholic school that most girls go through. I wanted to be a nun because that's who taught me. And I can remember about being 13 and 14 and wanting to be a nun. And then I remember picking up my first drug, which was alcohol. And I should have known I was in trouble from the minute I picked it up because I didn't pick it up to have a drink. I picked it up to get drunk because everyone else had gotten drunk but me. And I wanted to know what that was like. So at 14, wanting to be a nun. At 16, I was giving birth to my first daughter. At 17, I was giving birth to my second daughter. And at 18, I was doing time in my first bid for prostitution. I find it amazing how quick I jumped from a nun to a hooker. But that's really how fast it took me. And I have met people who have used so much more drugs than I did, but I get amazed at where the shit ended up taking me. And I began going in and out of jail, and my using was the same as your using. And all of a sudden, 10 years go by, and this little girl who wanted to be a nun was standing in front of a judge, and I was sentenced from 1 to 14 years in a women's prison in California. And we were talking about it tonight at dinner, and I guess the only ones that could appreciate the humor of it are people who know me very well. But when I did time, it was still run on the silent system. We left the cell block in silence, we ate in silence, and we went back. And if you know me, you could have given me 20 years, but don't ever tell me to shut my mouth. So it was the worst thing they ever could have done to me. When I was in there, I did, well, I'm sure a whole lot of you done time. I did exactly what everybody does who does time. I wanted out. So I was going to do anything I needed to do that my report looked good at the parole department. I went to Mass on Sunday. I went to every group that arrived in there, and Narcotics Anonymous was one of them. Now, you also have to understand it was the 1960s. They didn't talk about us having a disease. The drunks had a disease. We were bad, and that's why we were in prison. So I went and I listened, and I thought, well, that's cute, and that's nice, but it didn't mean anything. And I got out on parole, and I was paroled back to the state of New York. And it was the beginning of learning what it was to be an ex-convict. I was having a bad time getting a job, found out what jobs I wasn't allowed to hold because I was a convicted felon, and a lot of doors were getting slammed in my face. People wanted references I didn't have, and I didn't go back to drugs, but a funny thing happened. I started to remember that when I put a pistol in someone's face and asked them for their money, they never asked me for a reference for my last job. So I knew where to get a job, and I knew where to get money, and back I went. And finally one day I picked up the newspaper, and there was an article in it about a group of ex-convicts that were trying to pull something together, and I thought, well, maybe that's it. Maybe they'll understand, because I was in a rage. And I made that phone call and went into my office, and it wasn't a 12-step program. It was just a bunch of ex-cons that were really getting together for themselves and trying to help other people coming out. So it was the beginning of me being with my own and feeling a little safe. And I worked there about a year, but my personal life was in shambles, absolute shambles. And finally I met this woman, and she came in one day and she said, I can't stand you another minute, put your coat on, we're going to a meeting. And I had no idea what she was talking about. And NA was not in the East Coast yet. So she took me to the other fellowship, and it was not good years for us back then. I was kind of told that I couldn't come to any closed meetings. I could only come to open meetings, and I wasn't allowed to share. And I didn't belong there. I mean, that was real clear. I often look back with a smile wondering, why did I keep going back? And other than that I was a real angry person, and they gave me someone to say, fuck you to, I kept going back. And I always tell this part of my story because I think it's important that we kind of look at how judgmental we become when we get clean, and how we tend to lose our patience and understanding of the newcomer. I was going to meetings for almost 9 months, I think, and it was summertime, and I pulled up outside of a meeting, and I was driving a Cadillac. And my sponsor said to me, where'd you get the Cadillac? And I said, it's my boss's car, because I had a job by now. And she said, your boss gives you a Cadillac to come to a meeting in? And I said, yeah, he's a trick. So she said, what do you mean he's a trick? And I said, he's a John. And she'd look at me and say, Fran, you can't be doing that while you're coming to meetings. I'd say, okay. And it was a good 6 months after that when she called me outside of a meeting. And she's like, I got to talk to you. And I said, what? And she said, a couple of women in the program said that when you opened your pocketbook up to get out your cigarettes, they saw a pistol. I said, yeah. And she said, what's the gun for? I said, the robberies. She asked me, what robberies? I said, the ones I commit to pay my rent and pay my bills. I mean, it made all the sense in the world to me. One of the things that it took me years to realize is that when I walked into a 12-step program, I had just been released from an institution for the criminally insane. To say I wasn't playing with a full deck is to put it mildly. So what happened is I walked into a meeting, and what I heard was, all you have to do here is don't pick up and go to a meeting. So that's what I did. No one said I had to stop turning tricks. No one said I couldn't commit robberies. All they said was, don't pick up and go to a meeting. How I stayed clean that year and a half, I have no doubt I have a higher power someplace. I didn't get busted, and I stayed clean. And then I heard everybody talking about the steps, and I didn't know anything about the steps. I used to see them hanging up. And I used to say to her, how come we're not doing anything with the steps like everybody else? And God bless her, she was wonderful. She'd say to me, Fran, you're too sick. It's okay, just keep coming to a meeting. And you know something? I didn't know I was nuts. I really didn't know. I knew I felt different, and I really didn't think this was going to work for me. I figured it worked for you, but I was so lonely that what you offered me was some friendship at night. I didn't call people, I didn't hang out, but I felt part of something, but I was convinced it would never ever work. And it took us a while before she very slowly began working with me on the steps. And I guess it's kind of, I carry that down with my sponsor, my sponsees, because one of the things I figured out, it took me, and this is just for me, a couple of years for the fog to clear to begin to work the steps. I couldn't have told you what I did. I didn't remember. I laugh at it now and it wasn't funny, but I was going to go to Europe. And when I went, I had gotten bad information, and they told me I had to bring my birth certificate and my marriage certificate down to get a passport. And I said, well, suppose you've been married a couple of times. And they said, well, you got to bring all your papers. Do you know that I actually sat on a phone one day and called the capital of every single state we had? Because I remembered the names of the men I married, and I didn't have any idea where I married or divorced them. And I had to go on this search to try to put my life back together about where did this happen. I knew I had paperwork with a name on it, but I had no idea where it had all happened. I looked at that first step, and I just need to kind of tell you what it means to me today, because I don't quite remember a whole lot about what it meant to me then. But to say that I worked steps for a while and still didn't feel a whole lot different, and then something special happened. A friend of mine relapsed, and she relapsed real bad. And I was trying to hold on to her for dear life. And someone came up to me one night and said, Fran, do you know what NA is? And I said, yeah, I remember them from California. They said, well, they're here in New York. I said, where are they? They said, we don't know, they're underground. And we went on a hunt looking for them. And I was at a meeting one night, and some guy raised his hand to share, and I saw his hands. And I knew I had found me a dopamine. And I went up to him after, and I said, you're a heroin addict? And he said, yeah. And I said, do you know a thing called NA? And he goes, yeah. I said, where are they? He says, come on, I'll take you. And there were about 3 meetings in New York then. And I didn't go for me. I wanted to get this friend of mine clean. So I dragged her off to this meeting, and I really, really thought, I didn't know what I thought you were. But all I know is I was at a meeting, and when they said anyone with under 90 days raised their hand, and the entire room raised their hand. And I thought, well, okay, that's what this is. This is for people who just got clean. Because I had no idea that I was going to be okay there. And I started bringing her, but she did a typical, she'd come for 15 minutes and she'd split. And I'd leave with her. Then she'd stay till the coffee break and she'd leave. And before you knew it, I wasn't leaving with her anymore. And then I was showing up when she wasn't there. And one night she said to me, "You know you're not going there for me anymore." And I said, "Yeah, I know." Now, I was clean about 16 years at that time, or close to it, and I was still hanging on with every bit that I could hang on with. And I can't tell you about what changed in my life the day I walked through a Narcotics Anonymous room, because everything changed. My whole life started to make sense to me. I began to work the steps the way NA would work the steps. But you see, you had new words that I hadn't heard before. I had heard about being powerless over alcohol and powerless over food and powerless over pills. But you weren't saying that to me. I finally learned that I was powerless over my addiction. And all I can tell you is this particular addict. I was addicted to alcohol, to drugs. I smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day. Anyone who knows me knows you never ever see me without a cup of tea in my hand. I go through at least 25 cups a day. I have the ability of abusing the shit out of anything that can be abused, including relationships and friendships. And I began to understand what wasn't working right in my life. That it was all of it. The drugs, that was the easiest part. I stopped that. You don't use, you don't get high. It was the rest of the stuff I couldn't pull together. They began talking about what else that step does in your life. And for me to this day, if I'm in a space where my stomach's in a knot and I'm not breathing right and I know I'm uncomfortable, I have a sign that I am trying to control something that cannot be controlled. Whether it's another human being, whether it's my job, whether it's the weather, whether it's the traffic. And I become totally unmanageable when I try to control something that can't. So the step is real simple for me. The second step I had absolutely no problem with, for the simple reason I knew I was nuts. But I also heard people saying insanity is when you repeat the same thing over and over and expect a different result. Well, it was the story of my life. So I had no problem, and I'm going to tell you something very sadly. It's 28 years later. Folks, guess what? I still do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. I don't do it as often, but it's there. I had a real bad time with the third step because of a word that was in it. You used the word God, and I wasn't going for it. Now, I had a really great bunch of people around me, and they tried everything. They tried good orderly direction. They tried use the people in the rooms. They tried meetings. They tried everything. And I could have done it if they weren't telling me to turn my will over to you. You weren't getting it. And it stopped me for a long time. And it took me a long time before I realized that I really always did believe in something. Every time I bought a bag of dope, I prayed and believed that it was real. Every time a cop would come to bust me, I'd pray to God I could give him something in the back seat and get out of this one. There was always prayer and always hope. So I knew there was something. It was a word. I came from a bad Catholicism. God wasn't a loving thing. He was the son of a bitch who sat up there and watched everything you did, and you didn't even have to do it if you were Catholic. If you thought about it, he zapped you. Right? So I didn't have a chance in hell with this God. For me, what I did, I found myself a higher power. And I just knew I needed to call it something else. And at that particular time in my life, I decided to call it Harry. And Harry and I have a terrific relationship with each other. And you know what? It made it kind of special, and it was mine, and it wasn't yours. And I really developed this wonderful, special relationship. I got real disappointed in my fourth step because I heard so much about it. Now, first of all, I need to tell you, I think 4 of them. And I have no regrets over that. Each time I did it to the best of my ability at that time. But I had a secret. And I really was convinced it was a secret that was going to go to the grave with me. Nobody was getting this one. And it wasn't till I finally took some suggestions and I put women in my life, real close women. And I had a fear that if you knew this secret, you would really be judgmental with me. And you would think I was nuts. And I was sponsoring someone that was real close to me, and we were going to do her 4th step, and I decided I was going to share mine with her. And I finally upped the secret. And you know the amazing thing at the end of it? When I told her, she looked at me and she goes, "Boy, you were really nuts." And I busted out laughing. I mean, my worst fear had just happened, and it wasn't the end of the world. And one of the things that disappointed me is I don't see as much of it here in Hawaii, but in New York, there's this obsession with the 4th step. If anyone's having a bad day, it's because they haven't done their 4th step. Right? If you're not feeling comfortable in the program, it's because you haven't done your 4th step. If you have a fucking headache, it's because you haven't done your 4th step. So there's this whole build-up on this 4th step. So I go ahead and do this 4th and 5th step, and what it gave me, really one important thing it gave me, it taught me how to trust another human being. Other than that, it didn't give me shit. It gave me now a reason to go into the 6th step meeting. All right, now I earned my passage. And then came the next 2 steps that nobody ever told me about. I'm awful glad nobody ever told me about, because I think I would have told you to go to hell. When I got here, everyone said to me, "Now you're going to change your whole life." You didn't tell me that when I came in. You lied. You said all I had to do was not pick up and go to a meeting. And I'm grateful you lied. I needed that time. And I also used to look at those steps and I'd think, anybody normal would want to get rid of the defects of character. So this is good. I'm going to get there and all this shit's going to go away. And I got there and nothing went away. And I got stuck with it. And I stayed there a long time, and what worked for me, all right, is I realized that what I was hearing you say was defects of character were bad, and shortcomings were bad things. And they might have been bad for you. They weren't bad for me. My defects of character and my shortcomings kept me alive. They helped me survive the street. They helped me survive the penitentiary. They didn't hurt me. They were my ally for years. So what I began to do for me is stop looking at them as bad things and realizing that in a time of need, they were the best friends I had. And now my life was changing, and I had to learn how to say goodbye to them. Now, mine didn't come easy. Some things I stopped right away. I really did. Other things, my God, they're ingrained in granite, and they're going to the grave with me. You know, I can remember there was a guy in New York who really helped begin NA, and he was wonderful, and it was 10 years later, and he was the most illegitimate person I knew in New York. He was a bookie, he was everything, all right? But he was clean. And I used to get on him all the time. And I walked into a meeting from work one night, and he was at the meeting, and he said, "I got good news for you." And I said, "What?" He said, "As of January 1st, I went totally legitimate." And I said, "You're kidding." And he says, "No." And I said, "Well, normally I'd be happy, but your version of legitimate isn't always everybody else's." So we went down this list, and I said to him, "You see, I told you, if I could stop stealing, anybody could." And he looked at me and he said, "Fran, what's on the table?" And it was one of those long tables at a meeting, and it was one of those clear plastic bags that you get in the shopping store. And I was short on garbage bags, and I had just taken some from work, and they were sticking out of the bag. And I looked down and I said, "It's garbage bags that I just stole from my job." And he looked at me and he said, "So if I stop stealing like you, I'm going to do real good in recovery, right?" And I had about 18 years then. In 1988, I think, I spoke at the World Convention. And it was the very first year of my recovery where I was able to stand up at an NA meeting and say, "I finally stopped lying this year." It took me 19 years of being in recovery. But one of the things I started to learn and forgive myself for is I came from a home of alcoholism, and I call us the children of the lie, because we were raised to lie to make sure no one ever knew what was going on in our house. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't stop. And it took me years and I would lie over the dumbest shit. And the minute it was out of my mouth, I'd want to pull it back, except I was too embarrassed to tell someone I just lied to them. And it took so long to be able to, it's over, I can't do this anymore. So the defects went slowly, right? But I worked on them slowly. I didn't push. I gave time some time. And all I know is each step came into my life exactly like it was supposed to, because I went to do my list for amends. And and I did the list wonderfully. I started out with the people who were the closest to me, and I worked myself through a whole list. And then when it came time to do amends, guess what? I started on the opposite end of the list. It was easier to do amends to other people that were kind of distant. And some of them I kind of like who I had become in doing it. There were people that I could not do amends to. I mean, I physically hurt people. I'm not going to walk up to some goddamn ex-con out in the street that I shot and say, hey, Max, sorry about that, because I'm going to end up dead. So I knew there were things I owed back. And I worked in New York at that time, and I worked in Grand Central Terminal. And a lot of homeless and a lot of people from mental institutions are there. And what I began to do was every winter I would adopt one homeless person. And I would make sure they would have coffee and a donut every single morning in that terminal. And it was kind of my way of paying back something that I couldn't pay back to some people. And I went down my list and down my list. And the last people on my list, some of them were funny. I owed my mom some money. And she's one of those mothers that always, oh, never mind, you're clean, never mind, So I had put a couple of $100 together, and I thought, I haven't done this, I need to. And I sent her a check for $500, and I didn't worry about sending that because I knew she was going to say to me, no, take this, take care of yourself. And the bitch cashed the check. And it was the first time she ever did that. And I realized how I wasn't quite ready to do all the amends I wanted to do, especially financial ones. But my youngest daughter had picked up by the age of 16, and from the minute she picked up, she was a raving addict. And we went through a lot of bad times together. First, we went through the typical dumb parent shit. I was going to control her addiction. After all, I couldn't control mine. And her and I went to war for about 2 years, a bad war. And I took my ass to another 12-step program where I belonged as a parent. And I got the help and the support I needed, and our war was over. And we were probably the best friends we had been in a long time. And she was the one I was the closest to because she was the bad kid, just like me. I understood her. My other poor daughter was the good kid, and I didn't know what the hell to do with her at all. I didn't know. I didn't understand good kids. And God bless her. I can't tell you how hard she'd check into detoxes, and 2 days later she'd be out, but she kept getting in there. And she came one night, and I watched her get out of a cab, and I knew she was tipsy. And I was just in one of those moods that night. It was just nostalgia night. And she came in, and she knew I'd been crying, and she says, what was the matter? And it was amazing. It was the very first time I can ever remember. I could pick up a strange guy off the streets, lay up in bed with him and tell him I loved him, but I couldn't tell my kids I loved them. And I had a real bad time touching them because, you see, I didn't give a shit about this guy, but if they rejected me, I would have been fucked up. So I wouldn't go out on that limb with them. And that was the first night that I ever remember telling her that I absolutely loved her and that I wish I could turn the clock back and undo all the shit I did to her, but I couldn't. It's over, And I said, I'm doing the best I can, and that it was tearing me apart seeing her high, because I knew why she was high. She had the disease I had. And She told me she didn't blame me for her disease, and she felt a little luckier than most kids because she knew where to go if she ever decided she wanted help, because they'd been programmed to death by then. And it was the very, very first night that her and I ever held each other, and we just sobbed in each other's arms. And she left that night, and 24 hours later I got the phone call that she was dead of an overdose. I often think about that night, and you know the first thing I remember doing was looking up in the air and saying, thank you. Thank you that I had finally had a chance to say that I loved her and that I was sorry. And that made it real important for me to be able to begin to tell people how I felt about them, because I'm a horror. People in my life know I love them when I abuse the living shit out of them. That's what I do, you know. I call my sponsees dumb bitches. I just curse people out, and that means that they're close to me. And I knew that it was important that I stop that, but it didn't make it easy to do because I didn't know how to do it. And little at a time I tried. I really tried to get that soft side of me up because it was the side I wasn't comfortable with. See, I'm comfortable with that other tough-ass side. It's the softness that kills me because I'm so afraid someone's going to walk all over that I just hide it. But I had a lot of gratitude that I had a chance to finish up some business with her. And the amazing thing was, we all knew she was going to die. She was using that bad. And she always made me promise that I would have her cremated and I would keep her ashes. And she had this cat that she absolutely loved. And that I would keep her ashes until Charlie the cat died. And that I would put their ashes together. Well, I need to tell you that I hated this fucking cat and it lived 10 more years. And I used to tell people this was her revenge for me being a horrible mother. She got even with me right up till the very end. I finished my amends and I felt okay. And then when I learned about that step, that you're finished for a while. And then all of a sudden you begin to feel a little uncomfortable with somebody and you realize there's unfinished business maybe you didn't think about back then. And my oldest daughter and I, we have done amends with each other, and I have a fantastic relationship with her. And we have done amends with each other at least once every 2 or 3 years because something comes up and I feel like I'm not finished, but I got a great relationship that helps me through that. So amends isn't always just done and you move on. It kind of like the rest of the steps, it lingers. When I had to do a personal inventory about being wrong, I don't want anybody to ever worry about that step, really. Because I don't think anyone could take our inventory the way we take our own. We are probably worse on ourselves than anyone else could ever be to us. So I always take my sponsees when it gets to that step and I said, go take care of your inventory, you know, because they'll kill, you know, you do. We're just so hard. That wasn't a problem for me. I had a problem when we got into meditating and praying because, this may come hard to believe, there's times I can keep my mouth shut, but I couldn't shut this. This just goes and goes and goes. And I kind of laugh at how I tried to get into meditating. People said to me, find a quiet place. Well, I couldn't find one. So one day I go to the library. I said, okay, this is it. It's a nice quiet place. I'll be able to meditate. You know what I did in the library? I sat there at a table and I watched people checking out books, and I sat there wondering, why are they checking out that book? They don't look like... I was taking everybody's inventory. I couldn't stop. But the great thing about that step, it walked me into a church for the first time. I thought, you know, churches are quiet, maybe there. And you know what's great? It doesn't matter what kind of a church for me. I can go into a synagogue, it doesn't matter. There's something peaceful for me in any kind of a church setting, and I quiet down. So that's what began to work for me. The 12th step is probably the most moving and powerful step in my whole life. Because I really, after my first couple of years, I didn't just walk the walk. I put recovery into my life, and I really, really worked at being the best human being I could be and living my life that way. So I didn't have a problem with that. I had a problem with our words. You know, when they talk about a spiritual awakening, I couldn't quite get what it was. Now, you may have one, all right? My version, and it's strictly Fran's version, I believe probably on my deathbed, I might have a spiritual awakening. I think it's like a slow process that happens all through recovery. But what I feel the most privileged about is that I've had spiritual experiences, and that's what I call them for me. And the only way I know how to describe them, and the sad thing is they only last for a short period of time. They happen, and maybe you can hold on to the feeling for 24 to 48 hours, and then it's gone. But it's that special time when you're allowed to know that you're exactly where you're supposed to be at the exact time you're supposed to be there. Something happens. And the first one happened to me years ago in recovery when I went to an NA East Coast convention at Yale University. And I felt it. You got to realize the fellowship on the East Coast was real small then. And we had this convention and all kinds of workshops. So you didn't get a feel of who was there until the night of the banquet. And it was so huge they had to ask us to go out on the campus of Yale University to make the circle to close the meeting. And it was the first time ever that 2,000 addicts were in one place. And you looked at this circle, and almost half the people couldn't say the prayer because it was so awesome, and that feeling in here came that this is it. This is the feeling. And it just didn't last long. And then I went to a world convention, and honestly, I don't remember if it was Chicago or Washington. And there was 1,500 people there, and at the banquet we were at round tables, and I think there was 8 or 10 people to a table. And there was a man at that table with me. And I wrote a note, and I passed it around to him. And he opened up the note, and he read it, and tears began to go down his face. And he took the note, and he put it to his heart, and he just stared at me. And what had happened is, when I was out in the street, depending on what drugs I used, depended on what mood I was in. And if I had taken some pills, I was an evil bitch. And I was out there all drugged up on some pills, and this man walked up to me on Broadway in New York and said to me, "Have you eaten dinner tonight?" And I looked at him and I said, "Get the fuck out of my face." And then he kept it up. And he finally said, "By now a crowd has gathered because I'm being so obnoxiously loud." And then finally he makes the mistake, realize I'm being a hooker. "Do you have money to eat?" And as loud as I could, I said, "Get the fuck out of my face, because I don't turn no tricks with no fucking priest." And the priest was Father Dan Egan, the junkie priest. And he was out there trying to get me to come in to eat because I looked awful. And here it was, 18 years later, and he was the man sitting across the table from me at this convention. And the note that I wrote to him was, 18 years ago, did you ever think you and I would be sitting with 1,800 recovering addicts together? And I remember so much of the stuff he used to try to teach us out there. I used to ask him, "Why do you fucking bother with us for?" Because we'd go to a meeting and go out and use. And there was some humor about him taking us to meetings. You have to realize there was no NA. He'd pick us up in the street, put us in this car, and drive us to a meeting, and before we'd walk in, he would take a collar out of his pocket, and he would put the white collar on. And I'd say to him, "What the hell are you doing?" And he'd say, "You know they don't want you girls in here." I say, "Yeah." He says, "But they're drunks, which means they're all Irish Catholic. They're not going to put a priest out." And he'd walk us in, and nobody would say a word to him. And one of the things he used to say to us is, "There's a place down in here And once we get there, it's going to be a feeling for us that no drug could ever take us to. And when I began to have these spiritual experiences, I knew I had finally hit the place Dan was teaching me about all those years. But that night at that convention, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be that night, with him there. We had an epidemic hit New York. It's hit the world, but it hit New York pretty bad, called AIDS. And I watched it come in, and I watched it get closer, but I never thought it would hit the inner circle, my sponsees. We were all clean too long. And bingo, here it came. And somebody I sponsored for 8 years was positive, and she was getting sick. And I knew right from the beginning she was positive, but I couldn't get her to go for the test. And I finally talked her into it one day, and she called me up that night and she said, "Fran, please don't be mad at me, but I need to tell you something." I went home, and she was living with this guy for 3 years, and I told my boyfriend that I was going for the test. And he told me if I went, I had to move out because he couldn't handle it. And she said, "I'm not going to go for the test because I'm more afraid of being alone than I am of dying." And you know what? I understood that because I'd been there. And I hung up the phone, and I was sitting there, and all I said to her was, "I just got a feeling you've just decided to commit suicide." And I was sitting at my kitchen table with the tears just streaming down, and my phone rang. And this man on the other end of the phone said, "We would like you to come speak at our convention in Oshkosh, Wisconsin." And I busted out laughing because I never knew there was such a place as Oshkosh, Wisconsin. I mean, I knew we had dungarees, but I just thought it was the name of dungarees. And I said to this guy, "Where?" And he says, "Oshkosh, Wisconsin." And I started to laugh so bad that I realized the telephone call came exactly on time because it pulled me out of where I was. So I agreed to go. And everybody in New York was kidding me about, "What the fuck are you going to do in Oshkosh?" And we kept saying, you know, who's shooting dope? The cows? I mean, you couldn't even imagine. So off I went to Oshkosh with no idea about what the hell I was doing. And they had a meeting there on grief. And I decided to go. And after the speaker was finished, people were getting up to the microphone. I used to say this kid, but he asked me to stop saying that. This very, very good-looking young man named Mark got up, and he had 90 days clean. And he said that his mom gave him up for adoption when he was a kid, and that when he turned 18, he went on a search for her, and he finally found out where she lived, and when he got there, she had died several years before. And he was kind of sharing how he got left with, why didn't she love him? Why didn't she care? And why did she just toss him out? And that night, I was going to speak at the banquet, and I was sitting up there, and everyone's saying to me, "Who are you looking for? You don't know anybody here." I said, "There's a young man I'm looking for." And I saw him come in, and I went down, and I leaned over and kissed him on the cheek, and I said, "Mark, tonight is for you." And he had no idea who I was. And when I finished talking about the steps, I talked about things that I've done in my life in recovery. And one of the things I did is I had a daughter that I gave birth to when I was in prison, and I'd given her up for adoption. And in recovery, I went to a place that helps you sign up. And I signed up saying that if and when she was 18, if she wanted to do the search, I was willing to be found. And the reason I did that is I felt she had a right to her roots, a right to know where she came from, but more important, she had a right to know that was the hardest decision I think I ever made in my life. And that I had already destroyed 2 kids' lives. I finally loved another human being enough to give them a chance at a shot of life. And I looked down, and Mark was just crying. And when the meeting was over, him and I spent the whole weekend together. And he said, "You'll never know what you did for my recovery because I never thought that she might have loved me. And I never thought she might have done it because she cared." And he said, "I hope the day comes when she finds you." And when I left, I said to him, no, you don't know what you've done for my recovery, because I now know why I'm in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And there was that feeling again, that you were exactly where you were meant to be. I got a phone call from Phoenix, Arizona, asking me to come speak. And I said, yeah, I'd never been to Arizona, I'm coming. And I was in therapy at the time. And I was also in graduate school, and I was going to graduate with my master's degree. And I happened to tell my therapist, no, I'm not going to graduation, I'm going to Arizona. And she said, no, you're not. She says, cancel the trip, because you're going to get up on that platform and you're going to accept that diploma and you're going to finally take credit for something you've accomplished and you're not running away from it. So I called Arizona up, said, sorry, can't make it. I'm going to my graduation. And you know, graduation was wonderful because NA was there. I mean, you have to understand Fordham University is a big Catholic university in New York. And NA arrived with motorcycles in black leather. It was wonderful. And I was really glad I did it. And the following year, I got a phone call, and this year it was going to be in Tucson, Arizona. And it was Arizona asking me, well, will you come this year? And I said, I sure will. And at that convention in Tucson, Arizona, I met the daughter who I gave up for adoption 23 years before. And I wasn't supposed to be there. I was supposed to be there the year before. And it was one more time where I knew it happened again. You end up where you're supposed to be. And the same thing happened to me with Canada. They called me 3 years in a row and asked me to come speak, and I couldn't. And finally, the third year, I said, I'm coming. And I got there, and two men met me at the airport, and it was Quebec, and it was French speaking. So they had sent two interpreters for me. And they took me out to eat, and they explained to me that there was a man there named Jocelyn. And Jocelyn had been at the World Convention where I spoke, and he had a dream. And his dream was that someday he would get me to come to Quebec, and he would be the person to introduce me at a convention. And I found out that he was in the last stages of AIDS, and he had ended up in the hospital that week, and he couldn't make the convention. And he was the vice chair that was supposed to introduce me that night. So the next day I got up and I went and I said, give me an interpreter, I want to go to the hospital. And they sent someone with me, and I apologized to the man on the way. I said, I'm sorry for what I'm about to do to you, because I do death and dying work. And we got there, and Jocelyn was probably down to about 80 pounds. And he cried when I walked in the room because he couldn't believe we took time out to come see him at the hospital. So we talked for a little while, and I held his hand, and I finally said to him, you're going to die soon, are you afraid? And the interpreter couldn't do it. He was standing there with tears coming down, and I said, you have to do this for me. So he did, and Jocelyn began to cry and said he was afraid. And I asked him what he believed in. And he said nothing. Then that's what he was afraid of. So I began to talk about the AIDS epidemic in New York, and it wasn't newcomers that we were burying. It was people with time that we were burying. They just got clean too late. And I told him that most of the people we buried had a lot of clean time and a lot of service, and that I'm convinced that the reason they've gone first is wherever they've gone, they've started an NA meeting. And all we're going to do is leave our people here to go to our people there. And that they're waiting for us. And he started to smile and said he felt better. I asked, I need to apologize to newcomers. This is not an NA policy, all right? This is Fran's. So don't take this one to the bank. I asked him if he was on medication, and he said no, he was in pain, but he was afraid to take the medication. And I asked why, and he went like this. And I told him that he had a right to die with dignity, and that he should take whatever the hell he needs to take to hold on to that damn dignity. And he said to me, are you sure? I said, we don't have a punishing God in our life. We have a loving higher power today. And I remember when I left him, I looked up to the sky and said, and if I'm wrong, blame me. Don't take it out on him. When I went to say goodbye, Jocelyn started to cry, and I put the side of the bed down, and I got into the bed with him, and I just held him, and we both cried together. And I left. And I came down Saturday night to the banquet, and there was 1,500 people in Quebec, and you could hear a pin drop when I walked in the room. So I looked around, and I said, what the hell just happened? And my friend Sergio said to me, you don't know, do you? And I said, no. What? They delivered him by ambulance to the convention. And he got up there and introduced me that night. And he introduced me as his angel who's arrived. And before the night was over, I was able to go over and say to him, I need you to do me a favor. And he said, what? And I said, I have some unfinished business with my daughter. And you're the only person I know who's dying, and I need you to take it with you. And I sent her the most loving message I could think of. And Jocelyn and I hugged goodbye, and I said, we'll meet in a better place soon. And I left. And I knew one more time that I got to Canada exactly when I was supposed to be there. So I don't have any doubt about my life. And then I got asked to come to Cheyenne, Wyoming. And we had to change planes in Denver. And I'm going through the airport, and I see this guy with sandals, a long beard at those days. He looked like Jesus Christ walking around, and shorts, and an NA shirt. And I walked over and said, hi, you going to that convention? He said, yeah. I said, well, I'm Fran from New York. And he says, I'm Tom from Hawaii. So we had a real special trip. It's a half-hour flight from Denver to Cheyenne in a plane that you have to crawl into. You can't stand up, and you're sitting with the pilot. And we kept hitting these air pockets, and it was probably the trip from hell. And I had someone I sponsored with me, and when we got out of the plane, she was furious with me by now. And she said, if we got this far on that plane, I hate to see what they're picking us up in. And Tom and I walked out, and he looked at me, and I said, I don't believe this. They came in horse and buggies to pick us up. Tom and I spent a weekend together at Cheyenne, and we had a wonderful weekend together. And when we left, he said to me, I will get you to Hawaii somehow. And I think it was about 2 years later, or a year, I don't even remember, I got the phone call from Hawaii to come here to speak. Tom was on the committee. So I came, I said, I'm so glad Tom's not controlling. But my husband doesn't usually come with me, but we knew this was going to be a vacation and probably our one and only trip. So we were going to come and make a 2-week vacation out of it. So we came and we spent our first couple of days here, and it was wonderful. And then we stayed in town for a little while, and then we went to all the other islands. We got to the Big Island.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I said to him, we'll be back. And he said, I know. And all I knew is, I'm coming back to that island. So the next year we took a 2-week vacation, and we spent the whole 2 weeks there to see if we had that same feeling. And a friend of ours called me up, Mary, one day, and she says, they're building these condos, and if you two are serious, why don't you just buy one? You can always sell it if you change your mind. And in New York, we were making terrific money, so we could do it. So we did. And we kept coming back every year. And we come twice a year. And last year, I had a job that I loved. I was a supervisor on a mobile unit, and we did the HIV testing with hookers on the street who were substance abusers and homeless. And I was in heaven. I mean, I looked forward to going to work every day. And we were coming here last year, and about 2 months before we got here, I said, John, I got that feeling. And he says, what? I said, I'm going to be offered a job. We need to discuss what we're going to do if it happens. And he says, don't be so stupid. You are not. I said, John, the feeling's there. And about 2 weeks before we were coming, he said, I got a funny feeling something's going to happen. Let's talk. And he was coming up on his 20 years in the railroad, said he wasn't about to leave, so we made this deal that if I got the offer, I'd take it. And we came here for a month's vacation. And that was a year and 3 months ago. And I've been working here since because I got the job. But I got here and I kind of knew it was home. And there was something about there and the people there. And I went through everything everybody goes through moving here. You know, the first weekend I was here, I felt like someone had parachuted me in the air to a desert and dropped me where I didn't know a living soul. Now, there was no reality to that. But I was driving around crying, and I went to a Friday noon meeting, and there was a newcomer there that had about a week. And I broke down crying in the meeting, and when it was all over, he said to me, "Fran, why don't you go home and get some sleep?" And I thought, gee, what a novel idea. I had just traveled for 18 hours. I thought, God bless newcomers. And then I did fine for a little while, and then, about 3 months into being here, I totally fell apart. And I went into meetings saying, I don't feel like I belong here, I feel different then, and I went up to John, Farmer John was from New York. I said, how the hell do you do this? What do I do? And I was having a real bad time trying to change, to be part of something. And I work with the so-called bad kids. I work with kids up at the high school. And one of the local kids was sitting there one day listening to me. And I said, I keep waiting to calm down. And he looked at me and he goes, why? And I said, well, it's the islands, it's the way. He goes, no, Fran, it's our way. It's not your way. And he said, nothing's wrong with the way you are. And I thought, what the fuck am I going through this whole struggle for? Here are these kids that are fine with me the way I am. And I got a terrific job. And I guess coming from New York helped because I go in and out of everybody's home, every nationality, and I have made every mistake there is. And you know what they do? It's okay, she's from New York. And I am totally forgiven everything I do. And in the beginning, the kids used to bring people into my office and they'd say to me, talk. And I felt like show and tell, you know, I put an R on the end of everything. I can't help that. But when they said to me, it would get better beyond your wildest dreams, I had an opportunity to go to London, Paris, and Rome on a vacation. And you know what was wonderful? I walked into an NA meeting in every one of those cities. When I got to Paris, they told me I had missed the English-speaking NA meeting, but AA had one. I said, not on your life. I want to be in Narcotics Anonymous in every one of those countries, and I did it. And you know, I think about, I didn't come from money or comfort. I was a hooker dope fiend from the street, and there I was in London, Paris, and Rome, and you couldn't have told me that was going to happen. When my daughter died, I kind of accepted the fact that there's a hole in here that was never ever going to heal, and I had to learn how to live with that hole. I have grandchildren today. I have two of my grandchildren are from Korea. And my granddaughter gets on the phone with me for the last 5 years since she can talk. And she says to me, hi, Grandma, I love you. I realize there's no more hole. I've been giving a chance to do for my daughter's kids what I could never do for my daughter. So someone was able to say to me, we're going to give you another shot at this. I had to get a new sponsor because I had the same sponsor for 18 years and she had 24 years and she went out. And I think I acted like most addicts would. I would sit there and say, who the hell is that bitch to do this to me? She's out there fucking dying, but I'm mad because I don't have a sponsor. And it took me a long time before I got another sponsor. And my sponsor lives in California, and she's been my sponsor for quite a few years, and she has less time than I do. And I can't tell you the lessons that I have learned from this lady. Because one of the things I realized is I really was a terrific grandma. And one of the things that she helped me realize, my sponsor, is I have finally become the mom I always wanted to be. It took years to be an okay mother. And I realized that that's okay. And it kind of let me forgive my mom. Because one of the things I learned about my mother through forgiving myself is she really is one of the most gracious ladies I know. She just sucked as a parent. And I wasn't a bad person. I was a bad mother. And that the two could be different, and I was able to be okay with me. It did take me beyond my wildest dreams. My sponsor and I did time in prison together 27 years ago. And the thought that we still have the relationship, and very recently I just went through something, and I honestly didn't know what to do. I was able to say, I do not know what to do with this. And I picked up the phone and I called her. And I said, Vita, here's what I think might be happening. Here's what else could be happening that maybe I'm not willing to look at. Tell me what to do. And I knew that when I made that phone call, I was going to do whatever she told me to. And I thought, well, my God, it's taken you 28 years, but you're finally fucking teachable. But I also knew I trusted someone that was going to be okay. And I was willing, because I can say today, I don't know what to do. I've never cleaned up my mouth, maybe someday. But someone once said to me, I should work on that. And I said, you told me. And it was a time when I went into church. Someone reminded me of this, by the way, here. I don't pray on my knees. And the reason I feel it's important to say that is because 98% of our speakers talk about praying, and I always worry about the people who don't, if they feel different. Well, folks, I have never once gotten on my knees, and I'm clean 28 years. So it's not mandatory. If you pray and that works for you, go with it. And if you don't, it's fine. I talk to Harry. And I went into a church one day with somebody else in recovery, and I was going through a real rough time, and I'm sitting there and I looked up and I said, listen, I think you might be out on a slip because there's a whole lot of shit coming down the pike here. And then I got real quiet, and then I looked up again and I said, listen, you motherfucker, if I get through this one, you owe me one. And when we left, this guy looked at me and he said, is that the way you pray? And I said, you people taught me that no matter what I did, my higher power was there with me. Why do you put regulations on that once I got clean? My higher power is there no matter what I do, no matter what I say. So I have a real loving relationship. Women taught me how to love. I stayed away from women, and everybody I sponsor had a problem with women, so we find each other. I liked hanging out with the guys. It was more comfortable. And I finally realized that the reason I didn't like women, because I looked at me. If I saw them, I saw me, and boy, I didn't like me at all. And women taught me how to love myself. And I have some terrific women in my life today. I watch them go through things. I watch them get clean. We were kidding coming here. Brenda and I have been together a lot of years now, and we kidded with Terry to watch Terry go through this year. And I lived with a man for 8 years, and this year we got married on the Big Island. And I wish we could say it was we got married because it was really romantic. He left work, we needed the coverage, we knew we were going to spend our lives together, so why not do what we need to do? But I'm going to tell you something. I shared that day with the most precious people of my life. It was wonderful. Everybody who was close to me was there, and we had the ceremony where we put my daughter's ashes. And what kind of flowers did we have? Alconias, okay. John brought them down for the farm, and he gave every person as they arrived a flower. And no one knew why they had them. And at the end of the ceremony, he got up and explained that my daughter's ashes were there with us in the water, and could we all go present the flowers. And at the end of the ceremony, you just saw this horde of people going out and just tossing the flowers in the water. And it was like the most perfect day you could ever want. And I think Richie was standing next to me, and he can always make me laugh because we all got very serious, and then all of a sudden Richie took the lei off his neck and swung it in the air and said, Patty, see you in a few. And he threw it in, and I just smiled knowing, at the end of when we did the ashes, John turned around and said that day, Patty, go play with the dolphins. And to know that I'm here and my life is here and that my daughter's ashes are here, we're all here. And everybody who's close to me is here. That's what this has done. You know, it's like I drive them crazy on the Big Island. I get into all their business and I want them all to get better. And I'm not going to stop, so I'm not up here doing amends.
We love you.
I always figure it's my lot in life to come here and make all of you miserable in your recovery. But I got a relationship in my life that's real different for me because I had a man in my life who kept pushing me through school and saying, go, you can do it, you can do anything you want to do. I said, I want to go to Hawaii, I like this job, go. It was like pushed and pushed, and it was real nice to finally have that in my life. I miss my daughter and grandchildren, I wish they were here. And maybe that's why I get into everybody else's. I've made everybody else my kids. I went to jail in Hilo to speak, and I walk in and this inmate comes up and says, hey, Grandma, nice meeting you. And I knew Hank had already been there calling me Grandma. Life has been good. I just had a wonderful weekend here, and you know what I find sometimes a little sad about leaving conventions and gathering? Some of us are going to see each other every day. Others we're not going to know when we're going to see again. And you spend that time and you say goodbye and you leave it up in the air, you know. And saying goodbye even to Jaybird this weekend is like tough for me to say. I don't know when I'm going to see him, but that's crazy because we've been to 8 conventions. We're going to see each other, you know. Someplace, somehow, we'll cross paths. And I've adjusted to living here, and I don't want to go off. You know, I got a chance to leave the islands twice the next couple of months, and I can't tell you how I'm dreading it. I'm home, and I'm here for the rest of my life. And I just want to end with something that Father Dan had taught me about us. I feel very, very well taken care of. You know, even tonight, certain people take turns taking care of me. And I don't even know if they know they're doing it, and I just laugh when it emerges. And tonight was the cutest because it's the first time he jumped in to take care of me. But we're eating, and all of a sudden, Abbott says, Fran, 7:30. I said, okay, Abbott, thank you. And he said, okay, I got the check. We have to leave, Fran. You have to go to the meeting. And I said, okay, I have a new caretaker. But everybody takes little turns. And physically, the polio I had in 1948 has come back to haunt me. And what I've learned is that it's not progressive, and it doesn't get worse, but I'm going to go down a little at a time, and I'm not going to be able to do what I used to do. And I keep myself as healthy as I can, but I can't go through a day without laying down and taking a nap, or I can't make the night. But you know what? I'm adjusting to that, and I take a goddamn nap every day, even if it's for a half hour. I'm not going to let this happen. You know, I said, if I go down, I'm not going down easy. So I work out, I do what I can do to take care of myself. And one of the things Dan taught me that he used to say is there was a story going around that addicts used drugs because they wanted to die. They were suicidal. And he said he never heard a bigger fallacy in his whole life. He said he's never once met an addict that wasn't in so much pain that all they wanted to do was to feel better, that they used drugs seeking a life where there was none, in addiction. And he said, we are the most spiritual people he's ever met in his life. Our only problem is we knocked on the wrong door for a long time. Thank you for giving me a place to say I'm Fran and I'm an addict.